could I welcome you to our second session here today, and for taking the time to be with us, and we're really, really grateful for that, and we know it takes a lot of time to prepare for these sorts of things, so huge thanks from all of us. Just before we start, and Sarah asked the first set of questions, could I just ask you to say your name and the organisation you represent, starting with Rosie?
I'm Rosie Stamp. I'm a researcher at Healthwatch, Suffolk.
Okay. I'm Naisy Hazeldine. I manage the youth domain at Metro Charity.
I'm Cecily. I go to the Metro Youth Group.
Great, brilliant. That's great. And Sarah's going to start us off.
Hello, I'm Sarah Champion. I'm the MP for Rotherham. Cecily, can I start with you? Thank you ever so much for coming today. We really, really appreciate it, and it's important to us to hear firsthand from people who are at the coalface, and so the three of you coming today is really, really beneficial to us. But Cecily, in your opinion, and I know it's only your opinion, what do you think are the biggest health problems that young LGBT people are facing right now?
I think it is around mental health. I mean, I genuinely don't think I know a young LGBT person who hasn't had some problem with their mental health at some point, genuinely, and it's not like I don't know many, and I think that's causing big problems, because then you've got young LGBT people coming up with mental health problems. They're not necessarily they're finding it harder to then access education because they've had mental health problems through their whole adolescence, and I think that will then change sort of the demographic growing up around professions and where LGBT people are. If during adolescence people were struggling to do their exams because they were too worried to trying to stay alive.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's that uncommon.
Why do you think it is?
Well, I mean, I started primary school in 2004, so just as Margaret Thatcher's legislation disappeared. Just as it disappeared. So technically the whole way through my education, schools have been allowed to say, like, it's okay to be gay. However, that isn't necessarily actually what is happening in schools. My primary school was homophobic. I don't know if teachers knew about it, but it was normal insult. Oh, you're so gay, you shouldn't do this, you're so gay. I left primary school in 2011, that was still going on then. And teachers just sort of tell you not to say it, just don't say that, but it's never explained. So children go through primary school experiencing homophobic abuse right from the start of very, very early years. And then this has this idea of being gay is wrong. I shouldn't be gay, I need to try and be straight to fit in. Then you go into secondary school, and for some kids it stays really homophobic. I had a friend who still experienced homophobic bullying right up to leaving year 11. For me, my secondary school was fine, it wasn't homophobic at all, bar the first couple of years when primary school stuff began to sort of end. However, as soon as school was okay and school felt safer, we were coming to our age where people were starting to date, going out, and then you go out with someone just as you've become okay with being gay again, and you're shouted at and told to go to hell on the street, or someone. And I think that creates a real issue with mental health going up, where people just don't ever feel like they fit in, ever, or that it's safe to go out. Yeah.
I'm really sorry to hear about your experiences, but I'm really grateful that you're sharing them so that we can try and make a difference. Nazir, is that what experiences of other young people? I mean, is that resonating with you? Is that common? What do you think are the main health issues they're facing?
Absolutely, yeah. I think mental health, because the mental health, there's so much research to back up what we see within our youth groups and with our young people to show that mental health of LGBT young people is a really significant problem. And I think if we're thinking about healthcare and life chances and life experiences in general, that mental health underpins kind of everything, because when we talk to young people about, I've spoken to young people specifically about their experience of healthcare over the last couple of weeks to kind of consult them in preparation for this, and a lot of young people will say, well, I'm too anxious to access healthcare, I'm too anxious to speak to someone at CAMHS, I've had bad experiences in the past, therefore I don't want to go along to my GP. So I think that then underpins young people's experiences of accessing any kind of healthcare. So mental health is really important that we see that as underpinning everything, and that's the kind of main focus, I think. And it has to be interwoven into everything.
And do you think it is a particular issue for LGBT children? Because I'm thinking when I was at school, if you were ginger, if you were poor, if you were too bright. There would be all of these sort of subgroups of terrorism that was going on against children. So do you think it is a particular thing that LGBT children are experiencing?
Absolutely, yeah. And we've got all the evidence to show that. So, for example, we've got from Stonewall's recent 2018 report, 52% of LGBT experienced depression in the last year. If we're talking about trans people, that's 67%, and non-binary people, that's 70%. And then obviously if we think intersectionally and we're looking at whether someone is disabled or BME, or that, it heightens again. And that is significantly higher than it would be for the general population. So there's a lot of evidence to show that it is heightened and that experiences of anxiety specifically are very, very high. And there's a direct correlation between things that Cecily has been mentioning of not feeling safe in the street, not feeling safe at school from a very, very young age, being taught that who you are is not okay, that you're going to be targeted for that. I think there's a direct correlation between all of those experiences and then very, very high levels of anxiety specifically.
Cecily, for you, when that was going on, did you think, oh, I need to go and get some help about this, I need to get some support?
Well, no, it's your normal. Like, it's not like at primary school age you can understand that your experience isn't necessarily that of your friends. You just don't have that awareness yet. So it was only much later. I mean, I'm on a year out at the moment, so I'm going to uni in September, and I'm working at an after-school club at a primary school. And the conversations around that is very different. I don't hear homophobic slurs anywhere near as much as I used to hear them at primary school, and it's only kind of hitting this point where I'm going, oh, so that isn't normal. My straight friends didn't actually have to experience that. But I'm only realising that now at 18, 19.
Yeah, and realising that now, is it something that you would like to explore and get support on, or is it just something that you just think, you know, I've got to put it in my backpack and keep on walking?
I mean, I don't really talk about it, but I've had mental health problems for other reasons anyway, so I kind of got support for other stuff, and maybe that will come up, but it feels kind of like a normal part of growing up.
Thank you. And Rosie, everything that you've been hearing, I mean, you're sort of Healthwatch, so when people do go and get support, is the provision there? Is it good enough?
Well, from the research we've conducted both last year and this year, we are finding that, as these guys have said, LGBT young people are really struggling with their mental health. So just to give you some stats, 11% of young people who are not LGBT said they currently have a mental health issue when we asked them. However, LGBT young people, 36% of them had a mental health difficulty. So that would suggest that the services aren't meeting the needs. Again, they're more likely to have self-harmed. They're more likely to report having low self-esteem. So from what we're hearing, there is a gap in provision for this particular group.
Thank you, Jo.
Eddie.
You may have heard me asking the first panel, what are the best ways, do you think, to improve the health of young LGBT people?
I think that if you can get some teaching into children really, really early on, as they're starting to come into primary school, that not being straight is okay, I think that will drastically improve the way children see themselves as they grow up. Because you've got that sort of stage at 4 or 5. I remember overhearing a conversation between a bunch of 4-year-olds where they were going, oh, you know, a boy kissing a boy is disgusting. Before I had a go at them and told them off, I asked, but is a boy kissing a girl disgusting? It was yes, they're both disgusting. And that point in time where children are holding both of these things equally, they don't like them both. But at that point then you've got like heteronormative media, they've got their parents, they've got their friends' parents, they've got, you know, all these different role models in books and everything they're consuming, and slowly that idea that a boy kissing a girl is disgusting disappears. They don't get that for a boy kissing a boy or a girl kissing a girl at all. That doesn't exist. And if that can come in, children will grow up not thinking there's something wrong with them, and that sort of stage of everything's disgusting hopefully will start to shift so it doesn't exist anymore.
Right, that's the start. Other thoughts?
Around
how do we improve the health of LGBT people? So that from the mental health point of view, that's the early stage thinking. Have you got any other thoughts as to?
I mean, later on, I think there's an issue accessing services for a lot of young people. At least that's been in my experience. It hasn't mattered if you're LGBT or not. It is very, very hard, at least where in my borough of London and the neighbouring one, to access mental health services. So I think that's an issue actually across the board. If you've then got lots of LGBT who really, really, really need it, and access is really difficult for everyone, and they're still not getting in, I think that's causing sort of big problems. So I think changing access for all children will make a huge difference to LGBT children, because they'll start being able to access it.
I guess absolutely my background is in education, so I'm really passionate about making sure that schools are usualising these identities and all of that kind of stuff. I could go on about that for ages, but focusing on healthcare and ways to make access easier and how to treat people who are having health issues right now. I think that from speaking to lots of young people specifically about services for mental health, absolutely they're echoing the same thing that Cecily's saying, of that it's being very hard to access those services, really long waiting lists, having to meet a certain threshold. So young people saying that they've exaggerated certain things because they've heard that that gets them onto the list quicker, and those kind of situations. But also that if you are a person who has been let down by teachers, and maybe your parents aren't supportive, maybe you've seen examples of homophobia or transphobia within general media or what you've seen on the street, you're likely to have a very difficult time trusting professionals. And so we hear a lot of young people saying, even when they do get to the top of that list and they're given access to CAMS or they've got links to kind of mental health services, it's very hard for them to trust those services and think that that person is going to respect their identity enough to be able to use that service and get what they want out of that service. So
this might be a difficult.
Yeah.
So because what? Because they don't have an affinity with the LGBT community, because they haven't experienced it themselves. Why would they not have that trust?
I think because it is a bit of a gamble. So we do have examples of healthcare professionals discriminating against LGBT people, or an example off the top of my head is there was within the National LGBT Survey, there was some statistics around the number of lesbians who have been kind of told specific things within mental health services. So stuff like the fact that you are gay is directly because of childhood abuse or because of trauma or things like that. So if you've experienced any of those kinds of things, or even if you have a doubt that you might experience those kind of things, it's going to be very hard for you to access that service with trust, which makes it very difficult to create a feeling of trust where some people can access services. And I think at the moment, a lot of young people specifically will only trust services that are LGBT specific. So if they're given someone through CAMS and they're not 100% sure that that person is going to be respectful of their identity, they'd rather not engage and wait until they can get an LGBT specific counsellor, or just not turn up to sessions, is what happens a lot as well. So I think it's about thinking about ways that we can train up those professionals to a standard where we can really, really trust that they are going to be respectful of all identities, and then also communicate that to young people so that they know that they can trust those people. And that's a difficult journey
to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
Rosie?
So in relation to how we can fix things, I think all of these ideas are fantastic. Definitely need more access to services, specialist services. But I don't think it should just be limited to the health system. So I think young people who are LGBT, education is a key part of their lives, and they spend most of their time at school, particularly in rural areas such as Suffolk. It's often the only connection they get to peers or their friends. And what we hear from schools is that they are very aware that young people who are LGBT struggle with their identity, their body image, and related anxiety, and as a result of this need more pastoral support within the school. So ideas for solutions could include support within schools. So for example, we've heard of secondary schools implementing LGBT support groups, and also there's a school local to Suffolk as well who every time they get a new pupil in who is either questioning their gender identity or has transitioned, they create a transition plan with that young person. They set out a vision of how do you want things to look at school. They talk about what might seem like really small things, but how their names appear on registers, what the situation is around toilets and changing rooms for PE. And it's small changes like that can be implemented that can really make a really huge difference to the well-being of a young person. So I think education in schools, educational settings could be a key area to work with.
Right, thank you. And with regard to pressures of body image pressures, how significant do you think that is? I mean, I imagine with regard to the issues that you described at school, then that would be an area of concern. Definitely.
The research we've done, which looked at around 14,000 young people in Suffolk so far, it's still ongoing, but the results to date show that body image is a far bigger concern for LGBT young people. Young people who are identified straight, 38% said they worry about their body image, compared to 60% of LGB young people. And then when we break that down by gender, young people that don't identify as male or female, 62% said they worry about their body image, compared to 21% of males and 55% of females. So there is a discrepancy there, and the reasons why they're struggling with their gender identity that they've told us, with their body image, is because they're struggling to find their identity at that age, and they also have concerns about how other people perceive them, and they feel a sense of shame for being LGBT, like they don't fit in. So I really think we can do something as well in schools to educate young people around body image. There is a clear desire amongst young people to learn more about body image in PSHE lessons, in RSE, for example. So I think if we're able to not just educate LGBT young people about body image, but also the wider cohort of young people, that will improve general kind of views and attitudes towards the LGBT community.
Is there anything else that the government should be doing? So the government has made this a pledge as part of its action plan to tackle it. The question I asked earlier, what would you be doing if you were the Prime Minister?
Well, I think the action plan that is published, the LGBT action plan, is a brilliant start, but what I would like to do if I was Prime Minister is really focus on young people. The action plan is quite broad, it has excellent recommendations, but I feel like it didn't directly apply to young people, so I think I would look to, whether it's part of the action plan or as a separate action plan, have a LGBT youth plan which directly targets young people who are LGBT, because as we're seeing, the issues they're facing are quite significant.
Cicely, were you about to jump in?
Actually, can I just ask a quick, how would that differ from the LGBT bullying in schools sort of plan that they've got in place at the moment? The government have got a particular plan around LGBT bullying in schools. You don't think that goes widely enough? No, I think bullying is definitely a factor. We found that LGBT young people are more likely to be bullied, so that's certainly key. But there's so many other issues that they're facing. We know their self-esteem is much lower than their peers. They spend a lot more time using social media. It seems to be a kind of a form of support. I am speaking on behalf of young people in Suffolk, so it may be different in more urban areas, but we did find that those online communities provide a lifeline for these young people.
And also use of drugs and alcohol is again higher amongst LGBT young people. And lastly, the reluctance to seek support and help, the fear of kind of opening up to teachers, to services is also an issue. So I think it goes beyond bullying.
Sorry, Eddie.
Could I speak on that as well? Just as I led the anti-HBT bullying project funded by the GEO before I did this role. So having done that, I think the action plan around bullying goes a really long way towards changing things for LGBT people within schools, but I think it's really important that we recognise all of the issues outside of bullying, as you said, and that there will be young people who aren't out at school, especially trans people who tend to come out later. So, you know, there are some people who that will really directly affect and help, but there are other people who actually bullying isn't the main issue for them, and it might be self-esteem issues, it might be mental health, it might be addiction, it might be body image, so we need to think about all of those things and not just focus on bullying necessarily. And I think a way of doing that would be to think carefully about mental health services that we provide within school settings, and ensure that we're kind of meeting bullying, tackling bullying, but we're also giving support and recognising that not all LGBT people will be victims of bullying necessarily, and they'll still need support.
Cicely, thoughts with regard to the prioritisation of body image pressures, and your thoughts if you were the Prime Minister for the day, what you would be doing as the government to help address it?
First of all, I'd like to sort of comment on what Rosie said earlier about accessing CAMS, before I forget about it. A lot of sort of young people accessing services, CAMS, whatever, will do it through their parents. So the parents send the emails, the parents go to the GP visits with them, the parents help to chase when they don't come up. If you're not out to your parents and there's an issue around, you know, the reason you're accessing CAMS is because you're trans, or the reason you're accessing CAMS is because you're gay and you're being bullied, your parents aren't there to help you to do it, and it's really hard to work out how to send an email at 16 to a CAMS worker and know what to say and what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, where my information will go. I was going home with someone I met, a friend at Metro, and he was saying his uni had contacted him saying he'd got lower entrance requirements, and he wasn't sure if that was because he was gay and he wasn't white, and that was the reason they'd given him lower entrance requirements, because he didn't really understand where that data went. Probably not, it's because he's state school educated, and probably in a postcode, and universities will help access that. But young people don't know where this data you're collecting goes. It's great that you're collecting it, but we don't understand that. We just see a tick box, and we don't know who sees the answer to that tick box. So why would I want to declare something if I don't know whether that's going to become on an online thing that exists forever? I mean, we spend so much time at school going, everything we put online goes on the internet forever. Well, what if I'm filling in an anonymous form, but I don't understand that that's an anonymous form and that isn't going to go somewhere that's on my record?
Right, it just means we're sitting.
And I think that...
Minutes, sorry.
It's all right. I think that really affects access to services as well, the lack of parents. Around body image, what was the question again?
Let's dwell on that for a second though, but how do you tackle that? I mean, there is an age of consent in terms of parents' relationship with their children, so how do you get around the fact that you could be 14 and you might want to access those services, but actually the way through it would be with your parents? I mean, because there is a flip side to that coin, which says there is an element of protecting, not necessarily relating to this issue, but to other issues where you might say, well, surely children need some sort of protection from their parents.
Well, so to start with, you can disclose stuff to your doctors at 14, for example, and your parents aren't allowed. You know, you still have confidentiality as a teenager, even under 16, in healthcare. So you are allowed to have conversations with your doctors away from your parents. They don't necessarily access that information automatically. I think what would help there is then having people that are adults that they know, who understand LGBT issues, who have been signposted to them, that can help with these roles that sometimes parents would take. And then from there, if there is a safeguarding issue around their parents or anything else, then a safeguarding team can make that risk assessment. The child shouldn't be making that risk assessment for themselves. Like, you at 16, you're not in a position to work out whether it's safe to go here, whether it's safe to go there. That isn't a fair thing to be asking children to do.
No, I agree. Yeah.
So, but if there's a feeling that they have to risk assess that for themselves, there isn't somewhere they can go first to help them get into services who can then support them with their parents. Kids aren't going to go. They're not going to risk it. They're not going to risk out it if there's a reason why this information getting out could make you or your friends unsafe. Believe me, you won't do it. Not as a kid. You will wait and you will stick it out until you feel safe enough to do it. But it's just getting worse in the meantime. And if there's nowhere for people to go where they feel like they've got help accessing services, people just aren't doing it.
Right. So what would it look like, my Prime Minister question, if you were redesigning this?
Well, youth groups, places for children to go, not just LGBT people actually, lots of anyone who's sort of hanging around streets. At least in London, streets aren't safe. It isn't safe to be out at night. If there was funding that went into these services, so there are safe youth services that lots of kids can access, and whether it's issues on sexuality or gender identity or, I don't know, family problems or issues around racism, if you have youth groups that have adults who specialise in all of these and people have access, that would be really, really useful. But at the moment, I mean, we're really, really lucky with Metro that Metro exists. Lots of kids don't have access to that. Yeah.
Right, thank you.
Good. And Stephanie?
So what do you think the role of...
So as promised, second bell.
What do you think the role of third sector organisations in the health and social care of LGBT young people is? So how is the function carried out, and what are the sort of good bits and what are the challenges?
Please can you explain what you mean by
The third sector, sort of charities,
okay.
Support groups, sort of not necessarily like a standard institution like a school or a healthcare.
Sorry, please can you repeat the question with...
So like, I mean, you may not have an experience of it, so it might be perhaps something for the rest of the panel, but if you've been to a youth group or you've been to a charity that helps young people, what role can they play, sort of outside of going perhaps to school or going to your doctor?
I mean, charities are really, really useful because they feel safer than school sometimes. School, you don't know what gets back to your parents, confidentiality rules aren't ever explained to you. Whereas charities, they're often really, really safe places to go. It's away from school and exam pressure, it's away from home. So these sort of charities are really, really, really important because they feel safe, because people feel comfortable and they make new friends. I think you just get lucky to wherever you find them. So actually, if maybe school, sure, like it'd be great if they could help, but actually more funding on charities and schools being able to refer children to charities. I know cadet forces that aren't LGBT specific, for vulnerable young people, schools refer them in. So if systems can work like that for LGBT young people and there's still communication there between safeguarding organisations and school, that's a really, really good way of being somewhere to go away from school where you're safe. But as long as kids can find it and schools can play a part in just signposting over, if it is outside of their sort of realm to help.
Did anyone want to add anything?
So Metro has like a really, really long history of working specifically with LGBT young people. So we were founded in 1983, and we've been working closely with young people and running these kind of youth groups ever since. And you know, there's also a lot of knowledge within the charity, our charity specifically, and other charities that is very, very specialist towards working with people because of that long history. And I think I'd echo what people said in the previous panel about the importance of things being co-produced. Using our specialist knowledge with funding and working alongside mainstream organisations, I think is really important and would be a really good model for things like mental health services. So we have funding to deliver counselling for LGBT young people within Metro, and very often we find young people who build up the courage and the knowledge through that to feel like they can trust mental health services and then can go back to CAMHS. And that transition is often young people asking us, can you go and meet with this CAMHS person and tell us that this person is going to confirm that they do accept my identity, because they want kind of our accreditation as a charity that they trust, to know that they can trust that health professional. So I think partnership between charities like Metro or specialist services and mainstream services could help build trust that we need to see in those services.
Yeah, I agree. The VCS is absolutely vital in supporting LGBT young people. Talking on behalf of the Suffolk area, we have a fantastic charity called Outreach Youth, who are a very small charity, but they provide support and signposting to young LGBT people or young people that may be questioning their gender identity. And from what we've learned about this group, the young people that use them find that support absolutely vital. This charity provides the only safe space that a lot of young people get. So they go through school with their friends without really feeling like they have space to talk about their identity. But these weekly sessions, for example, so a weekly support group provides that space that they really need. However, just to put this in context, of the 5,000 VCS organisations in Suffolk, Outreach Youth is the only single charity which supports specifically LGBT young people. So looking at the data we have, there's around 120,000 young people in Suffolk, and we know that around 8% are identifying as LGBT, which, if I'm correct, is around 9,500 young people in Suffolk that this single charity are trying to look after, and they can't cover the whole county. It's incredibly rural. There are pockets where they can work, so more urban areas like towns such as Ipswich and Bury, but there is still a lot of young people who don't have access to the VCS support. And also, I spoke to them prior to meeting today, and they really wanted to highlight how important local support is for young people. So there are lots of really good examples of national support. For example, I know that Stonewall can come into schools and deliver excellent one-day training to staff, to students. But what young people need afterwards is ongoing local support from people that know them, join groups that they can consistently attend, build relationships within that community. So I think in particular local BCS is really, really key. And also not forgetting the role of Healthwatch as a third sector organisation. We are, along with the other 150 health watches around the country, we provide a voice to people that use health and social care. So again, we are involved with CCGs. We attend meetings where new service deliveries are taking place. I'm involved with the transformation of young people services in Suffolk, so using the data that we've gathered about LGBT young people, we are then able to make sure it's heard at the right level and to the right people.
And I've got a final question, just to perhaps bring together the whole discussion. What do you think the priority of the National LGBT Health Advisor should be? Is there one single one, or should there be more than one? Whoever wants to go jump in first.
Yeah, I guess one thing that we haven't mentioned that has been spoken about a lot when I've been speaking to our young people has been the journey through counselling and access to gender identity clinics. And it's been a really difficult conversation to have with a lot of young people over the last couple of weeks because I knew specifically that was a real issue for young people, but talking to them openly and letting them know that they had the chance in this forum to express their views about that, there was a lot of emotion and a lot of anger and a lot of difficulty for them talking about that. So I think a real priority should be developing that and having trans voices as part of that development, so that they're leading the way in changing things and making it a service that is more for them rather than at them and about them. And there was a lot of young people saying that, especially when you're young, the timings are really, really important. If you're a young person who's initially coming out and saying that they need support around transition at the age of 14, then probably you've spent a good number of years building up to asking for that support. And then if you have to wait 2 years to even kind of get in the door to be able to have that initial conversation, by that point you might be 16, and there's a lot of changes that happen within that time. And a couple of young people spoke about that initial meeting when they go into the gender identity clinics being, one person described it as an hour's worth of verbal abuse, because those conversations were, after waiting for a really, really long time, they felt that they were just being analysed and questioned, and they weren't validated, and they were being checked upon, and there were hoops that they had to get through and tick boxes that they had to answer to be able to get the support that they really, really needed and had been waiting a really long time for. So I think a real within the conversation that I know is going to be had about changing what that looks like, what that journey looks like within the consultations that are happening around the Gender Recognition Act and things like that, I think it's really important that we include younger trans voices in that, so that they're part of that conversation and they can have their views heard and they can shape the way that that service is, because it's a service that should be for them. I think that would be a top priority, and they did give some ideas about ways that that could happen. So I know that we went on a little bit from potential solutions, but I've got some that I can go back on if that's useful. Just that the importance, especially given that a lot of young people will be rural, a lot of the people that we support are within London, but there's a huge amount of other people that don't have access as easily to services like ours. And I think developing online support and ways that that can happen through technology such as FaceTime and things like that. So I think that could be part of how we rethink that service, how we can develop online solutions and use technology to access people who are further out, and make sure that their views are heard and that also they can access things more easily. And yeah, I could go on, but I'll...
We need a longer session.
Yes, of course.
Thank you. It's to Rosie. I'm still reeling from the one LGBT charity for Suffolk. So I'm putting some responsibility on you as an advocate, I'm afraid. The last panel we spoke quite a lot about the disproportionately high levels of suicidal thoughts and suicidal attempts within the LGBT community. And one of the suggestions was, as each local authority has its suicide action plan, to sort of push specific services and support and recognition for the LGBT community within that. Is that something that you've done as Healthwatch, or is that something you could do as Healthwatch?
That's not something we've done so far, but I think that's something we would be able to get involved with if we can access the right people in the right departments. The LGBT findings that we've gathered recently are relatively new, so we're really kind of gathering momentum in terms of raising awareness about what we're finding. So I think, yes, that's an excellent idea to try and contribute to that.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Right, lovely. Thank you so much. That's the end of our second panel. Huge thanks from all of us for the time that you've spent with us today. Really interesting information and really great addition to our inquiry. Thank you very much. If I could ask our witnesses and also members of the gallery to leave, we'll just have a very short private session. Thank you very much.
The